Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning and welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. You're very welcome. Forestry is a key part of our climate change targets, but also a key contributor to producing the timber that our industries need going forward. But achieving levels of planting has been very challenging in recent years. And in the last year, we saw the introduction of a new scheme to attempt to reverse this low planting rate. This has brought increased premium, but there's also a high level of restriction, I think, on some of the lands that are allowed now to be planted, and I suppose more restrictive it's more restrictive in what you can plant. This morning, I'm delighted to be joined by Seppi Hona, Inspector with the Department of Agriculture on Forestry, and Tom Houlihan, our Acting Head of Forestry Department. Folks, you're very welcome.
Good morning, everyone. As I said, thanks, Pat, for the introductions. I'm going to go through the main incentives and measures that we have in place for the new forestry programme and look at the different forest types and look at the different grant rates available to landowners and farmers under the new forestry programme between now and 2027. So you might have seen some of these these booklets that we've issued around in the media and on social media and paper format. You might have received some of these from your Teagasc forestry advisors or your forestry consultants. They're just little booklets that we've produced outlining the main benefits of the forestry programme, the incentives, the grants that are out there, the premiums obviously that would be of interest to people. They're just things to look out for and to maybe read through them when you get a bit of time, The afforestation scheme, the aim of the afforestation scheme, as we know, is to deliver an ambitious afforestation target to plant more trees at farm level, at landscape level, and to provide ecosystem services for the environment and obviously climatic benefits too. To incentivize that, we've developed 12 forest types, most of which are relevant for farm forestry. If you want to diversify your farm income, if you want to plant a bit of forestry, there are a number of forest types that would be of interest to you, and I'll go through some of them now in a bit more detail. There's been a big increase in the grant rates, the premium rates, over 40%. For afforestation, you need a license, so you'll need to go to a registered forester. You can obviously go to your Teagasc forestry advisor, get some independent advice too, but you need a registered forester to assess the site and to complete your application for you. And then obviously all applications undergo a rigorous environmental assessment procedure internally here with ourselves in the department. So here are the 12 different forest types, just an overview of them. So you've everything from your native forestry, your FT1, right down to your FT12, your commercial forestry, your Sitka spruce, and 20% broadleaf. So you've got a plethora of options there. I'll go through some of them now in more detail. That's just a brief overview. So I suppose the FT1, the native forest type, I suppose I capture the two. FT1 and FT2 are really about native forestry, be it planting a corner of a field or an area or farm in native forestry. The FT2 is more focused on planting maybe a riparian woodland, a larger plot of riparian woodland beside an aquatic zone, a relevant water course. Might be an option for dairy farmers or suckler farmers. If you're adjoining a water course, you want to plant a bit of broadleaf along your water course for silt attenuation and nutrient attenuation. Very good option. Premiums are incredibly good. €1,100 a year for 20 years if you're a farmer. The grant rates are equally very good, over €6,500 a hectare. The grants usually go to the forestry company. They usually do the work, they do the fencing, they maintain the site for you for whatever amount of years it's required, and they ensure that it's their responsibility to ensure the crop goes through the various stages of assessment with ourselves, Then I'll skip over to forest type 5. 3 and 4 are more related to kind of public woodlands, native community woodlands. They're probably not really relevant to this, so I won't go into forest types 3 and 4. But forest type 5 is quite interesting. It's a forest type we created. It's basically, in a lot of farms, you would have scrub encroachment. You might have a bit of alder, a bit of birch scrub coming in at the bottom of fields. Previous to this programme, these these parcels were not eligible for grant or premium rates. So quite often we would have asked people to exclude them because existing forestry is not eligible, wasn't eligible for grant or premium back in the previous program. So what we've done now is we've acknowledged that this happens at farm level. We know that this is incredibly good biodiversity value. We want to incentivize people to keep these. We don't want people to clear them. We want people to keep them as part of their forestry plan, keep them, look after them. And there's actually a grant rate of €2,500 a hectare. There might be a bit of fencing that needs to be done, and then you might do a wee bit of underplanting. There might be a few invasives that need to be cleared from it. So there's a few pound there to do that. And then also there's an annual premium for that specific area of €350 a hectare. Again, if you're a farmer for 20 years. And again, it's about, it's about wood production, it's about environmental protection. And very often what I've seen in the past is there's always a parcel of land like this on a farm, it's maybe gone, maybe it's wet or it's not, it's a long distance from the farm, there's always scrub on a farm. So here's something, if you're planning to plant a bit of forest, you can include this as an FT5 a grant rate, and get a premium for it. The other, moving on to the forest type 6 is mainly your pure oak and your beech. Again, the grant rates they're similar to the native woodland, over 6,700 a hectare. The premium's over 1,000 a hectare a year. Again, for 20 years, that's well over €20,000 per hectare if you want to plant some pure oak or some pure beech. Then you've got your FT7, which is your diverse broadleaf, if you want to plant a bit of sycamore or Spanish chestnut, cherry, or birch. And you can also include a few additional broadleafs here. So it's not pure mixtures. You can also add a few, like 10 or 20% different species into these FT types. But this is just to capture the main species that this forest type site is assigned to. The grant rate for this is quite a bit lower. Still very good at over 4,300 a hectare. And your premium is just shy of €1,000 a hectare there a year. Again, if you're a farmer for 20 years. So very good options there, again, if you want to plant something other than just natives or your conifers, Then your forest type 8, agroforestry, getting a lot of interest. This is basically where you can plant trees in wide spacing and continue a level of farming between and under the trees, basically. You can see a picture there, a bit of silage being cut there. You can see cows grazing between the trees, sheep grazing between the trees. It's gaining a lot of momentum across Europe and the UK. So it's just something to look into. Grant rates have increased significantly. They're over €8,500 a hectare. Premium rates are just shy of €1,000 a hectare for 10 years only. Now, there are multiple benefits to agroforestry. There have been a few conferences, and I would encourage people to look into agroforestry. You can produce timber, you can keep farming underneath it, you can keep cutting silage, whatever you want to do. There are many options for agroforestry, and from an animal husbandry and the welfare point of view, there are a plethora of benefits there. And the research is there to show it. Then you've got your FT10. If you want to go down the route of continuous cover forestry, at the get-go, get a diverse range of species planted. Now the FT10, there's a dominance of conifers here, but they're diverse conifers. You have your Norway spruce, your Sitka. You can go on with your Western red cedar, your Douglas fir, your Western hemlock. So there's a range of different species that you can plant under the continuous cover forest FT, the FT10. Again, the grant rate is just over 5,400 a hectare, and the annual premium is just over €900 a hectare a year for 20 years. So again, if you want to go down that route, and again, that's gaining more momentum too, as we're looking at different forest management models. It is something that a lot of people are looking at, and this is a forest type that we've introduced for the first time that will get you in there with a diverse mix and get you planting and with that management in mind. Next is your FT11. This is your mixed high forest with conifers and 20% broadleaf. This would be if you wanted to plant, for example, 80% of pure Scots pine or Norway spruce, Douglas fir, and then your 20% broadleaf. So 20% broadleaf requirement is a state aid rule that we have to assign to every forest that we plant by area. So if you want to plant Sitka spruce, you have to plant 20% of that area with broadleaves. If you want to plant Norway spruce, you have to plant 20% of that area with broadleaves. That's just what the European Commission have asked us to do. So also, the grant rate here is just over €4,400 a hectare. Premium is over 860 a hectare, again, a year for 20 years if you're a farmer. The FT12 is probably in conjunction with native forest. The FT1 is they're probably 45% each. These are probably, the FT1's probably about 50-50 between forest type 12 and FT1, as I said. So this is your Sitka spruce. This is our bread and butter in our forestry sector. So you're 80% Sitka, and then you plant 20% broadleafs too, you know. And the grant rate there is just over €3,800 a hectare, and your annual premium is just over 740 a hectare per year for 20 years. So they're just the main forest types that we have under the normal afforestation scheme if you want to plant with a license. The other thing that we've introduced is what we call the native tree area scheme. You might have heard a lot about it. You know, and you might have spoken to some of your Teagasc forestry advisors or your foresters about it. We haven't had the uptake that we wished to get so far, so we're looking for more people to engage with. We are going to hold another training event over the next week or two for registered foresters and Teagasc advisors to clarify a number of things. But I'm just going to go through the native tree area scheme here now, just to explain the different scenarios that we have on offer. So this is basically, there are two options on the native tree area scheme. And the big thing is you don't need an afforestation license. Like, we're turning these around in 4 to 6 weeks at the minute. You know, there's an in-out kind of a system. So we have a layer that registered foresters and Teagasc advisors have access to, where you can basically, what I would advise people is bring your forester or your Teagasc advisor, send in your BPS map, mark on the map the area you're thinking about, or maybe ask the Teagasc advisor or the forester to look at the map, maybe on your farm, maybe identify the areas that the native tree area scheme might be eligible. Now, what is important to note, that's only an indicative map. It will require a site visit by a registered forester, and a registered forester has to do your application, and there may be a fee included in there. That's between yourselves as the landowner and the registered forester, you know. So the suitable NTA sites, they have to be used for farming purposes, and the planted area must be retained as a valuable semi-natural farm feature. So the Forestry Act does apply. So when you plant it, it must remain in forestry, you know. So there are two separate NTAS interventions available: the NTA1, creation of small native forests, and the NTA2, the creation of native forests for water protection specifically. So the NTA1 is for climate change mitigation, biodiversity, shelter, landscape enhancement, and habitat connectivity on the farm. You can plant up to 1 hectare. Now that's up to, you can plant half a hectare, you can plant the corner of a field with 0.3 of a hectare. Again, it's up to yourself, but you can plant up to 1 hectare. And you can add an additional 0.15 of a hectare of area, so unplanted area. We call it an area of biodiversity enhancement. So you'll have a total area, if you want to max that out, of 1.15 hectares, and you'll be paid on that. The planting grant's very generous. It's a small site, you know, the economics are challenging, so the grant rate is very, very good. It's over €6,700 a hectare. You can also apply for the deer tree shelter scheme if you're in an area where the incidence of deer are high. I would actively encourage people to be aware of that, be deer aware, you know. We have a lot of issues with deer around the country, especially when we're planting broadleaves. There is a fencing allowance of between 810 to 2,800 a hectare, and the annual premium is €2,206 per hectare for 10 years. So you get over €22,000 if you plant a hectare of NTA1. So it's very, very good. So I would really encourage people to look at it, you know, as an option. It's not a big area. Even if you want to plant maybe 2 corners or 3 corners of a farm and make up the hectare, it's very good, you know. NTA2, so this is all about water protection. So this is where we want to encourage farmers to plant new native forests in combination with an undisturbed water setback. The key here is protecting and enhancing water quality. We hear a lot about water quality, nitrates, irrigation, you know, water quality in general. This is something that we can do at farm level to really improve water quality locally, you know, and if we combine our efforts, that's going to have a big impact, you know. So again, you can plant up to a hectare adjoining an aquatic zone. Again, you'll have the additional 0.15 of a hectare, so it's 1.15 hectare max. And again, the grant rates is the same as the NTA1. The annual premium is slightly higher, 2,284. a hectare for 10 years. And again, as I said, it's for 10 years, it's over €22,000. So again, it's a very good option. If you have an aquatic zone, or if you have water features where this might be an option, talk to your forester, talk to your Teagasc advisor, get the advice, and see as a possibility that you want to go down, a route that you want to go down. You know, this is just to depict how it might look, in particular the NTA2. So you have your aquatic zone here, your river, you have your undisturbed setback. You can plant a few trees dotted around the setback. That's no problem at all. We would actually encourage that because, you know, it's good actually for the dapple effect and to protect, you know, to manage water temperatures for trees to be planted close to water edges. So we would encourage this type of planting scenario. You have your planting layout for an NTA2 intervention. Again, speak to your forester. Every site is different, you know, and walk the farm, walk the plots. You know, discuss what are the best options silviculturally and for your farm. So just to go through those options with them before you make your application. So then, just to go through within a forestation scheme, you have your farmer, non-farmer, 20 years for farmer, 15 years for the non-farmer, with 12 forest types. Qualification criteria for farmer premium. There's information out there on that, and your Teagasc forestry advisor will be able to give you some advice there too. You require a license, and again, you need a registered forester to do your application. Native tree area scheme, it's outside of the afforestation scheme. It's open to farmers and non-farmers. 10 years of premium. The land must be currently used for farming purposes. You can have a max of 2 hectares, so 1 hectare of NTA1, 1 hectare of NTA2 at farm level. Exemption for requirement to obtain a license. So it's a simple process, but you do require a registered forester because they have the expertise, the silvicultural expertise, develop that plan and that application for you. That's everything for me. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope that was beneficial and interesting.
Yeah, that was very, very clear, Seppi. Thank you very much. You might stop sharing there, and what we will have that presentation available by early next week. So if anybody wants to download it, it gives a really clear indication of exactly what is available to all. And we had a question there about farmers and non-farmers, so it is available to both categories with slightly different conditions. Tom, do you want to share your presentation? So you're looking more at the practical implementation at farm level for forestry.
Okay, so as you say, I'm looking at in terms of opportunities to integrate forests into farms. Just a few slides there on that. So the topics would be just getting started, what we call whole farm planning, to integrate all aspects of the farm, the farmer premium that was mentioned, a few of the scheme interactions, and if there's time, just a couple of the financial scenarios for scheme interaction. So just getting started in forestry, and initially there's a need to set clear objectives. I think that's very important for anybody, for what you want from your new farm. What it can deliver for you, particularly in relation to your farm and also your family and successors. We call this whole farm planning, and Teagasc can support you in this regard. And for new proposals, as Seppi mentioned, it's important to confirm your status regarding the eligibility of the land for future grant aid. And this includes putting a focus on the appropriate soil types and also the environmental considerations that was mentioned. So planning a new forest involves engaging a registered forester to make a forest application, the grant application on your behalf. And as your forest establishes, it's also important to take an active interest in its progress and its management. That will always pay dividends. And just looking a small bit deeper into whole farm planning, and forestry plays a very important role in enhancing the farm sustainability in terms of the financial, the environmental, and the social pillars of sustainability. And there's lots of things to consider. For example, matching species with the site type. What's your objective, and what tree species will meet your objectives? So this matching is a particular important cornerstone on your journey, and maybe considering a mix of forest types. You can have commercial forestry combined with protective forestry. Why not consider that? And is your objective growing a very valuable timber crop to meet future needs in terms of our housing requirements, our growing housing requirements? the opportunity to incorporate timber more fully into the built environment. So questions there. What are the interactions of forestry with the farming enterprise and also with the schemes? That's quite important. Certainly worth considering and exploring how forestry can provide real tax efficiencies and also efficiencies in terms of the return on labour on the farm. Of course, well-planned forestry, and Seppi has outlined some of the options there. Well-planned forestry can provide multiple environmental benefits from water quality protection, biodiversity protection, carbon capture, and landscape benefits in terms of connectivity and habitat creation. It can also play an important part in providing a resource. People maybe sometimes overlook this, a resource for family recreation and well-being. It can also, I suppose, play an important role in terms of efficient planning for retirement and inheritance, succession planning, that kind of area. And just remember as well that it is a permanent land use change, and that has to be taken into account in terms of the interactions and the whole farm planning scenario. So we mentioned the farmer status for forestry premium purposes, and what's the criteria there. So you need to be an approved participant in the Basic Income Support for Sustainability Scheme. That's the BIS for short. In the year of application for forestry, so an approved participant, but also be an approved participant in either BIS or the forerunner to that, which was the Basic Payment Scheme, in each of the previous 4 years before your forestry application year. So, for example, if you're applying for forestry planting in 2024, you need to be an approved BIS participant in this year in 24, but also a BPS or BIS participant between 2020 and 2023. That's the previous 4 years for the relevant scheme involved. So just looking at this BIS and eligibility regarding forestry, and this is very attractive because forestry planted since 2009 and which will be planted in 2024 can be eligible for the BIS payment as well as the forestry supports, but it needs to provide, I suppose, the provision for satisfying the conditions of BIS. So for forestry planted in 2023 and 2024, the requirement is that the land to be planted gave a right to payment under the Basic Payment Scheme. So qualifying applicants must have claimed and been paid the Basic Payment Scheme at some point between the years 2015 and 2022 to be deemed eligible. And then for forestry planted before 2023, so between January 2009 and December 2022, the land must have been deemed eligible land in 2008 and must have received the single payment scheme payment in 2008 prior to being planted from January 2009 onwards. So that's a bit more intricate there, but it's important to look at the eligibility for BIS in part of the planning application. And again, the afforested lands must meet all the requirements of the relevant scheme under which it was established. One other key BIS eligibility to mention, to benefit from the BIS payment on planted land, the BIS applicant or applicants must be the person or persons named as the forestry scheme beneficiary or joint beneficiary. This is really important. So it means that if you're the BIS applicant this year, you must also be the person or persons eligible for payment of the forestry premium. In other words, that there should be a name common to both the BIS application and the forestry contract. So that's important to bear in mind. It applies to members of the same family, and it should be fully considered, for example, in areas where the farm is being transferred, including within families. So there are important points to consider there. And then another scheme, CRIS, which is the Complementary Redistributive Support for Sustainability Scheme, and I suppose known as front loading as well. And it's basically an annual decoupled payment per eligible hectare to farmers that are entitled to the basic income support. And for eligible applicants under CRIS, there's payment on the first 30 eligible hectares claimed. And this can include eligible forestry and also eligible agroforestry. So that's another positive there in terms of scheme interaction. If we're looking at the acres, and quite a number of people would have gone into the acres agri-environmental scheme, and the terms and conditions allow for parcel interaction with afforestation and also the native tree area scheme without financial penalty. So parcels in acres won't get the forestry payment, but they can be split to facilitate planting if that suits the situation. In addition, the department may authorise under certain conditions an action that has been taken as part of an acres contract that could be terminated or the area adjusted before the normal end date, and this can be done without penalty or without full reimbursement of funding if the beneficiary subscribes to a new commitment that's considered of equal or higher benefit to the environment and or to the climate, and importantly that the existing commitment is completed for a minimum of 2 years, and the proposed new commitment is part of Ireland's EU-approved National Forestry Programme. So that's an interaction between acres and forestry. Looking at the organic farming scheme and forestry, and under the organic farming scheme, again, forestry is recognised as contributing and very valuable to the creation of landscape mosaic at farm level. Good planning required there. The organic farming scheme parcels may be converted to forestry during the organic contract period without penalty. Now, Seppi mentioned the 12 forest types, and the vast majority of those won't be eligible for the organic farming scheme payment, with one exception. Land declared as agroforestry can be eligible for the agroforestry grants and premiums, the BIS, CRIS, possibly the eco scheme, and also can be eligible for the organic payments at the dry stock rate. So that is quite a positive benefit for agroforestry, basically linking in with the organic farming scheme. Looking at the areas of natural constraint, and this, I suppose we'd have called this in the past the disadvantaged area payment or the compensatory allowance, and there would have been there's 3 categories there. Category 1, formerly the mountain category, paid up to 34 hectares. Category 2 would have been called more severely disadvantaged, paid up to 30 hectares. You can see the rates there. And Category 3, the less severely disadvantaged under the old scheme. And just, I suppose, the interaction here is that ANC payments and forestry supports are not payable on the same land. But there are opportunities, and there may be opportunities for farmers, we'll say with larger farms, to optimize these ANC payments and also plant some land, perhaps if they're above the 30 or 34 hectare maximum payment threshold. So that's just an overview of some of the schemes. Important to say that it will be, check in more detail your qualification for all schemes and in good time. And this presentation here is giving an overview of important qualifying requirements, but it's not exhaustive. And so it's essential to check all details on your farm situation to ensure that the criteria are being fully met. So we're giving an overview here, but in other words, just look into it in a bit more detail before you'd proceed with the planning. I'm just going to finish off with a couple of notional case studies. For example, here, first case study, if a dry stock farmer has about 35 hectares, assuming the assumption here is eligibility for BIS, CRIS, the eco scheme, A and C in organics, and looking at planting 10 hectares of forest type 12. That's the commercial type forestry, mainly conifers, Sitka spruce, with a proportion of 20% broadleaves and another area of 15% for biodiversity enhancement. That's forest type 12. So if we're looking at the different schemes and how they interact, if meeting the criteria, the forestry can also be eligible for BIS. So BIS could be paid on the full 35 hectares. CRIS is paid up to 30 hectares, so it could incorporate half of the forestry, 5 hectares. The maximum for CRIS is 30 hectares. I'm assuming here that the eco scheme, which I haven't really gone into, can be payable on all the eligible land, including forestry, but that means that the applicant must meet the eco scheme criteria. For example, maybe having enough space for nature across the overall holding. A and C won't be paid under forestry, so you take off 10 hectares, it's paid on 25 hectares if it meets the eligibility. And for this forest type 12, it won't be eligible for organic payments, or the organics would be paid under 25 hectares. And the overall premium for 10 hectares annually of forestry, forest type 12, would be €746 per hectare per year. So the overall figure here is quite a substantial payment. And just a second case study to finish, if we're looking at the agroforestry option, and again, we're looking at a dry stock farmer with 35 hectares, eligible for the BIS, CRIS, A and C and organics. So the main difference here would be that the organic farmer who's planting agroforestry, if meeting the conditions, can also get paid at a dry stock rate on the agroforestry. So instead of 25 hectares down here, there's a 35 hectare full payment. And also the agroforestry on 10 hectares has a higher premium rate for 10 years rather than 20. So again, a substantial payment here. This is just giving you an idea of the overall scheme interactions. And I'll just finish off by flagging an event that's coming up, if you don't mind. It's coming up on the 14th of March. It's our annual Talking Timber, which is a timber marketing event, very popular, very well attended each year, in conjunction with the Department of Agriculture, Food and Forest Industry Ireland. It's on in the Ballyclistine Hotel in Limerick Junction. Again, as I say, on the 14th, starting at 9:30. And this event has a number of elements: an outdoor demonstration, which can allow attendees to view the quality of timber that's required by the Irish sawmilling sector, and maybe some of the products that are there, and a good overview of them in terms of marketing timber and the opportunities there. Indoor presentations from forestry experts from the Department of Agriculture. We have guests speaking on taxation from IFAC. We have a forest owner giving his considerable experience and looking at the whole timber measurement and forest measurement, the importance of that, and also very good opportunities for networking right through the day, which runs between 9:30 and about 2:30. So that's the 14th of March at Limerick Junction. So I'll finish at that, Pat, if that's okay, and stop sharing.
That's great. I think a deluge of questions. If Seppi and Liam want to join us, Liam Kelly has joined us this morning to questions. I think one of our colleagues from Quilch have reminded us that National Tree Week takes place from this Sunday till the following Sunday, so this fits in quite nicely with that. Tom, you mentioned in passing the tax benefits.
Yes.
And I suppose for a lot of farmers who have an income off farm or a family farm or an income from the family, the fact that some of those premiums are non-taxable is a huge benefit and adds hugely to the overall benefit that you described in terms of the 26,000 in the example could in reality mean much more because of that.
Yes, I think it's something that's as you correctly point out, Pat, is often overlooked, and like the tax situation, it is quite, it's something that needs to be looked at very closely and in detail. If people are getting into forestry, and also, for example, if they're marketing timber or if there's transfers of forestry or sale of forestry, there can be quite strong benefits. For example, if you look at just taxation from an income point of view, a farm that's occupied by woodland managed on a commercial basis with a view to realizing profit, it's income tax free. Now, it is liable for the USC and also for PRSI, but it is income tax free, which is a huge benefit. If you look at some of the capital grants, for example, the capital gains tax from the sale of a forest, you can say the commercial woodlands that are occupied by individuals they're exempt from capital gains on the growing timber. And usually most of the value would be on the growing timber. The underlying land is not exempt. And then that's kind of a similar scenario for stamp duty. The growing timber is exempt from stamp duty. And there's also areas such as capital acquisition tax. There's agricultural relief there, or business relief, which sometimes people maybe overlook. But it's a huge area, and it's a huge benefit for people that are actually looking at forestry, or as I say, transferring on. And we will have a presentation on the 14th of March from IFAC, one of our guest speakers on the day, that will delve more deeply into the tax situation. And within Teagasc, we'll give guidance and guidelines, but for specific scenarios, it's important to get expert advice, I would say, as well. That's really, really critical.
Liam, we've a pile of questions. I remind people to use the Q&A, but you're going to be very busy for the next 20 minutes.
I'm going to have to speak quickly. So just to kick off, just a question to both of you. What is the current interest in forestry and the different schemes? So maybe Tom or Seppi.
Yeah, I'll kick off. Maybe Seppi can come in as well. Since the launch of the program before Christmas, we've certainly experienced a very high level of interest. And for example, we had, in conjunction with the department before Christmas, we had 20 town hall meetings right around the country, and there was over 1,000 people attended. And more recently, we've had a nationwide series of 36 forestry clinics. They were scheduled between January the 22nd and the middle of February for people considering forestry, and they were held in local offices, providing attendees with independent and objective advice, enabling to make decisions. And due to the actual high level of demand, we had initially 36 scheduled, and a further 34 day clinics were required, making up 70 overall clinic days, again, around the country. And we had about 500 participants attending these clinics. And as a follow-on to this, we certainly will be, there's actually post-clinic work by my forestry advisory colleagues to further assist the inquiries, but we'll also be looking in general terms at the trends in terms of the interest across the schemes, the different schemes, and also across the different forest types, and what's the potential for progression to planting, and maybe what are the impacting factors. Okay, so if there's some forests that are deemed ineligible or not meeting the requirements, what are those factors? We'll be getting some insights into those. Hopefully that will be valuable.
I might come in too, Liam. Like so figures wise, since the start of the year, we've just had over 40 afforestation applications, totaling over 310 hectares. Listen, it's not a place where we want to be. We do want to see more applications coming in afforestation. We've had 305 applications in total for the NTA, with a total of 225 hectares. Again, we do want to see an upswing there. It's not, again, where we want to be. We do want to increase the uptake of these various schemes that we have, obviously for the benefits that I've outlined and Tom's outlined, But what I didn't mention in my presentation, there are significant changes to this program, and they're as a result of our state aid approval. So just like all the other agri schemes, we have to go to Brussels and seek approval for a package. We did go and we received an approval for a package, but there are a number of restrictions that we previously hadn't been used to, I'll say. So there's a big change on, for example, on peat soils over 30 centimetres. So we're not allowed to plant any conifers on peat soils over 30 centimetres. We can only plant native forests on modified fens and modified cutover bogs if they're in agricultural use, so they meet a certain, you could say, a fertility value. We call it, it's a farming and it's not a protected habitat per se. We also have measures relating to breeding waders, high nature value farmland, and hen harrier. Now that's not to say that if you fall within this area that you shouldn't proceed and do the various reports and get an application. And it's like a planning application. You're not guaranteed to get a planning application for a house or a slatted shed or whatever. Forestry is no different now. So it's a license you have to get for afforestation. And these layers just need to be assessed. It's a state aid requirement. We can't fudge them, and we have to go through those steps to see can we get the application through them. But it's a process, and I would actively encourage people, just because you're in a HNB area or you're forester, your Teagasc advisor says, listen, you're in an HNB layer or you're in a breeding wader layer, that does not preclude you from planting trees. You just have to go through a number of steps to see is it eligible, and we then assess it, and hopefully we can give an approval for it. But it's just a number of steps that have to go through. So yeah, maybe we're not where we want to be from a numbers point of view, but listen, we have set up an afforestation technical working group where ourselves and members of the sector have sat down to work through these technical challenges. The group isn't about changing the rules, it's about looking at these different environmental layers that we have to look at. How can we guide people through that to make sure that, number one, they adhere to the requirements of the state aid rule too, but also that they're not put off by these layers and that they're actively encouraged to go through the process to see can we get the sites planted, you know. So yeah, I don't know, does that answer, Liam? Okay,
we'll move it on. Would agrarian farms be considered for agroforestry? Seppi, I'll ask you that.
Sorry?
Would equine farms with horses be suitable for the agroforestry scheme?
I'm not too sure now. I need to look into that. I'm not too sure if it's,
Liam, I would just suggest there that having equines in agroforestry, I suppose the critical area there would be to protect the trees, and maybe some of the measures that are in place, we'll say for sheep or young cattle, particularly in the early years, I think might be challenging for equine. Like there are opportunities to plant groups of trees rather than lines of trees in agroforestry, but the important thing would be to protect those trees from equines, which can, I suppose, present its own challenges. So I'd say it'd be something maybe to engage with the department on.
We are looking, just to come in there, Tom, we are looking at different planting prescriptions, for example. Like we've had a few inquiries from dairy farmers, for example, and obviously at the minute, what we grant aid as a protective deer tube, and their maximum height is I think 1.8 meters, and they're protected by two fence posts. So like for equine, that probably wouldn't be ideal because the horses or whatever, they'll just eat the trees because they're taller than the 1.8. You know, so they'll reach the trees and they'll damage the trees. Similar for a dairy herd, for example, the single tree will not be protected. So we're looking at different planting prescriptions, but we are able to do that under the state aid rules. So we are looking at various planting options, as Tom alluded to, and hopefully we'll have some clarifications over the next few weeks. What other agroforestry planting measures are available for farmers, including maybe equine, you know?
Okay. Just Tom, does agroforestry affect your nitrates payment area?
No, I suppose the good news there that has been clarified is that agroforestry can be positive, and it can, if you have a parcel of agroforestry, the fact that it's you can also continue farming, that it can be taken into account and given credit for the nitrates calculations. So we've had a number of queries on that, and that's a positive result from it, I think.
Okay, just two questions there. Again for you, Tom, for this one. Could you clarify what for farming purposes means, and also is equine considered farming in relation to premium?
Yeah, so for farming purposes, and again, if you look into the BIS scheme at the moment, to claim BIS, you need to be considered an active farmer. So that means an applicant claiming payments on land must be farming or managing the land. So activities could include, we'll say, meeting a minimum stocking rate of 0.1 livestock unit per forage hectare, producing crops, cutting hair or silage, maintaining landscape features, as long as you have got the evidence base for that in terms of maybe the receipts from contractors. So that's kind of included in the terms and conditions in BIS. If you have 100% eligible forestry, you can also indicate that on the BIS application, and that will qualify you as an active farmer.
Okay. And
sorry, what was the second question, Liam?
Is equine considered? Is equine considered for farming purposes?
equine can. Now there's rules within the ANC in terms of breeding and stuff like that, so people could need to check that out a bit further in terms of livestock eligibility.
Okay, I'm going to group these two questions again. Is the scheme open to non-farmers? And also, is the scheme open to land that's owned by local authorities?
So, yeah, as Seppi pointed out, for the afforestation scheme, there's a farmer rate for 20 years. And then, I gave just the general eligibility requirements. If you're not meeting those, you can get the non-farmer rate for 20 years. I think the exception within the afforestation is agroforestry. It's payable for 10 years to both. So that would be the situation under the afforestation scheme, and under the native tree area scheme. It's open to farmers and non-farmers, but the land has to be deemed to have been farmed. It's farming land, so to be of a reasonably good quality. I think, Seppi, would that be correct? Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct, Tom. Yeah.
Okay. In relation to the emerging woodland, why is the rate not the same as the establishment grant rate? And what's to stop someone grubbing out, if they had existing scrub and grubbing it out and then applying for the establishment schemes? What can you take that, Seppi?
Well, the short answer is there's nothing stopping anyone doing it, but I suppose if you have scrub or existing woodland, you need a felon license to remove that woodland. So I would actively discourage people to remove scrub or emerging woodland from their farm, because it's illegal. You need a license to do it. So I don't know why the grant rate is any less. Well, the grant rate probably because it's an existing woodland. The only thing that you might need is a bit of fencing, some underplanting. So the level, you're not dealing with an unplanted field. So obviously the grant rate's a bit lower. The premium rate, I think, is the question might allude to. I don't know why it's lower. It's maybe something that we need to look at, part of the mid-term review, maybe to up it a wee bit to encourage people to put these areas in. But I don't know why they're any less. Why it's any less.
Yeah. Again, another question in relation to the ecological assessment. Why can an owner carry out that assessment themselves, or what qualification would you need?
The how we've termed it is you have to be suitably qualified. So like obviously not everyone can carry out a habitat assessment for waders, or the HNV survey. So the way I would advise people to do is get someone who's qualified and competent to do it, because if we get a good report in that we can stand over, it will ensure the application goes through the system faster. If we get a substandard report, then it'll just cause delays. It'll cause maybe a further information request. It might require one of our own ecologists to go out to check it. So I would actively encourage people, pay a professional to do it and do it right, and then hopefully your application should go through the system a lot faster.
Tom, there's a question there looking at the forestry for water, and you mentioned the buffer that's there, and then the low area planting. But the question is, would it not be better in some situations to have more tree-lined banks where you might be providing stabilization of river banks and potentially some shade for water and keeping temperature down in the water? Are there situations where that might be beneficial?
Yeah, well, I think Seppi can come in maybe, but within the actual Forest for Water scheme, where there is a capacity for limited planting within the actual buffer area. That could be individual trees, or it could be small groups of trees. I think no more than 20% in total. So, and that planting will provide allowance for the multiple benefits that trees near waters can provide. Dappled shade, I think Seppi mentioned that. There's leaves and material that fall into the water at times, detritus, which can provide beneficial resources for aquatic life. There's shade, things like that. So, and bank stabilization. So there is an allowance within the buffer patch to plant a limited amount, which I think is reasonable as well.
There's a question, or a couple of questions relating to the fact that some non-native trees are allowed in various schemes, And there's just a general question as to what is the situation around native provenance of trees, and would it be better to try and ensure that we have native provenance? And I think the inference of the first question is that we have more native species there.
Yeah, I think, listen, obviously we want to encourage that people use native provenance as first, Pat, but we have to realise that we have an ambitious afforestation programme. We have acres, there's tree planting measures there, hedge laying measures there. We have a huge requirement for trees and shrubs in this country for our various agri and forestry schemes. And at the end of the day, we're a small country. We have a small number of our nurseries feeding that supply. And also, we need the seed supply to grow the trees. And there's a 3 or 4 year turnaround for nurseries that are working hard to get these plants supplied to the sector. So we have to be realistic in our ambitions on native species. Obviously, it's always the department's preference to use native species first and foremost, but then we have to look at alternatives to ensure we can get our schemes implemented. And we obviously have our various plant health measures there to protect us from those issues, and we just have to rely on those to keep the thing moving.
If I can come in as well, Pat, just in terms of, I suppose, does the debate that goes on in terms of native or non-native trees, and I think that there's room for both, and I think there's a need for both. So there's strong ambitions within the new programme and within the new forest strategy to enhance the amount of native planting. But we also need to look at our national requirements in terms of a wood resource. Under the Housing for All plan, I think we're looking at putting in a huge amount of additional homes, and the timber resource there definitely will come from the commercial planting. And like I said in my presentation, I don't see any reason why both can fit in together. For example, you could have a commercial-based forest that will give you very attractive returns, but also you can incorporate a bit of agroforestry, or if you're near a watercourse, you can put in the forest for water planting, which will provide definite protection and multiple benefits near water resources. So I think there's room for both, and I think we certainly need both in the future. If we're looking at incorporating more timber into our built environment, and I think that's growing in momentum. Timber frame houses are down at the mid-20s, I think, percentage. In other countries, they're right up into the 70s and 80s. There's certain countries, and they're building villages of timber constructed buildings. So I think we can be ambitious there, but we need the resources there as well. And we need to be more self-sufficient in our timber supply as well in the future. I'd say there's room for both. And that would be my view on it.
Okay. Liam, still plenty of questions coming in?
Yeah, still coming in. Just getting back to the NTA. Seppi, what is the minimum weight again for the NTA scheme? And also, just there seems to be difficulty with the NTA too, people trying to get the area up to 1 hectare, because it's normally 400 metres by 25 metres wide or so. So people are finding it difficult to get up to that area. So will that be reviewed, or
Well, you see, for the NTA2, we can't review it, Liam, because it's enshrined in the regulation, the legislation. The NTA2, it must be 20 metres wide, tree to tree width. So from the tree to tree, that's the width. So again, it all goes back to the definition of a forest, so again, we can't change the width. I did outline earlier, we are working on bringing a few changes for the NTA1, where we can reduce, if you want to, for example, plant a corner of the field. We've had a lot of inquiries about that. And you're caught with this minimum width of 20 metres. We have said in the Forestry Standards Manual, you can reduce your width from 20 to 10 metres for 10% of your plot. We've actually increased that without this 10-metre rule up to 30% for the NTA. That's what we're going to do, just to allow people under the NTA1 to do that. We're also hoping to bring in a 1 or 2 changes to bring in more water features and under the NTA2, but we're hoping to issue a circular on that to the sector in the next week or two. That'll clarify that too, and maybe bring in other water features and under the NTA2.
Okay, and Tom, just a question in relation to transfer during the lifetime of a programme, a 20-year premium for the farmer.
Okay.
The farmer qualifies, but then he transfers it, midway through to a son or daughter. Will they qualify? So you might just clarify where they may qualify.
Yeah, so in that scenario, Liam, where the land is inherited, by an immediate family member. The scheme provides that the new owner will receive the farmer rate that's maybe on their passing, but also there's a facility for people where the inherited or the forest is inherited or planned as gifted that can also come under that rule. And so the person, the recipient, will qualify at the farmer rate also.
Okay, and just to clarify, does these schemes fit in for local authority land again? Seppi, just people are just asking to clarify that again.
Yeah, public authorities can apply. Like we're dealing with various public authorities, Irish Water, National Parks and Wildlife Service, and local authorities can engage in. Like there are schemes, for example, the neighbourhood scheme. We've got a few very good ones around the country where landowners can come together with for example, local authorities and other agencies. So to answer the question, yes, they can.
And again, another one just on the forest, food forest planting. This is the new element under the agroforestry. Can you say when that's has there been much interest or take up on that yet?
No, I think we need to finalise how that's going to look, but no, I don't know when that's going to be launched. It'll be in the next couple of months, I would say, Liam.
And I understand it'll be on a pilot basis initially, anyway, for a number of hectares, and I'm sure there'll be learnings as they go along in terms of what's the best format and structure for it. There's always learnings as we move forward, I think.
And just Tom again, just can you clarify the difference between the farmer rate and the non-farmer again? So just in relation to the number of years and.
Yeah, so the farmer rate is paid for the majority of the forest types. The farmer rate is paid for 20 years. And the qualifying there is, as I mentioned, that you need to be a BIS applicant in the year of application, but also look back to the previous 4 years, either being in BIS or being in the previous basic payment scheme. That's the application eligibility requirement. For non-farmer paid at 15 years, for 15 years rather than 20 years. The agroforestry measure is paid over 10 years for both farmers and non-farmers. And yeah.
Yeah, go on.
And the native tree area scheme, which provides very attractive annual premiums of over €2,000 per hectare, is paid over a 10-year period. It's open to farmers and non-farmers, but the land needs to have been deemed to be farmed.
And just Tom, again, can you just clarify the interaction between acres and the new forestry schemes?
Okay, so you won't get payment, acres payment and forestry payment on the same land. But say if you are in acres, you could look at the option, for example, of if there was a parcel, say with a hedgerow in it, you can actually, or an area-based measure, you can actually look if it's appropriate to split a parcel and maybe consider forestry in part of that. But you need to look at what are the requirements for each individual measure.
I think there's been a lot of questions about the interaction of various payments, but I think it's fair to say that a huge amount of work has gone into making the various payments and schemes really complementary this time, where you have BIS and CRIS available, where you're obviously the ANC is not, and acres payment not, and there's a question there in relation to organic, but you can operate the two side by side in those cases. So I think it's been made, I think, very attractive for people to have a combination of those.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of queries, Pat, in terms of, I think there's growing interest, and Seppi mentioned there in terms of the organic farming scheme and how it can positively interact with agroforestry, and agroforestry seems to be growing. There's a growing level of interest in it, so you can eligible applicant for agroforestry can also look at drawing down the organic farming payment at the dry stock rate if all eligibility criteria are met.
Okay, listen, we're going to have to call a halt there. We can't believe that hour has just passed by so quickly. Thanks to to both you, Tom, and Seppi for a really clear presentation. I think there's a huge number of comments have come in just in appreciation of a really clear presentation. I think we've a lot of work to do for all of us. Hopefully you guys will be really busy over the next year with potential applications coming in. That's a success. So thanks very much for joining us. Thanks to Liam. Thank you for Mary for helping us with the presentation or with the webinar, setting up the webinar. Next week we'll be joined by Owen Cashman, who is a PhD student working in Solihead Farm, and he's looking at the work there in terms of lowering greenhouse gas and ammonia footprint of a pasture-based dairy production system. So really innovative work going on down in Solihead in terms of looking at, I suppose, the really high levels of reduction of emissions of both greenhouse gases and ammonia. So I look forward to that. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.